Okay, good afternoon. My name is Scott McCutcheon. Welcome to episode 27, I think, of our Yamaha Virago Cafe Racer project. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to be doing something exciting. This is a project I've been putting off for a real long time. It's taken me a lot of effort to put this battery box together. I gave myself a pretty nasty scar in the process of doing it, and learned that I'm not a very good welder, as well. And it's been a tough part to put this together, but I think it's one of the most custom pieces on the bike, to make one of these cafe racers. And the reality is, when I go around looking for battery boxes for this particular bike, most of the ones that I find they don't work. I mean, they're a custom battery box that's just a box for a battery, and you have to figure out how to mount it. And I see a lot of the guys who've been mounted up under the seat. Well, I don't really have room for that on mine, and then I see a lot of guys that do that build a box for the underside of it where the center stand used to be, and that's where I'd wanted to go as well. But I wasn't really happy with any of the box designs. They're all like real exposed, they're just open, and they look kind of crappy that way, I think, because the battery is exposed. And to me, it looks bad, it's dangerous, to have it exposed like that and that be that low to the ground. So I wanted a little more protection on whatever battery box that I decided to go with. Unfortunately, I just didn't find one. I couldn't find anything like that that I wanted, so I ended up making my own. So we're going to show you that today, and we're going to install it, and we're going to hopefully, we'll get the starter solenoid mounted in place, as well as the, we're going to see if we can mount the battery, like the primary battery cables and stuff like that. So this is the first step to getting the wiring done for the bike, so I'm really excited to do this one, and hopefully it'll work out real well. All right, let's get started. Okay, so this is the box I ended up building. You can see I'm not the best welder, but it has all the parts that I need for it. So the idea was, to fit one of these new batteries. This was the original battery. This is the size of the stock battery for the Virago. I went and bought one of these, and man, it is massive. It's super heavy, and it used to sit right here in the stock configuration. And while I guess you could make that still work, if you really had to me it just doesn't look good. You have this huge box right here that becomes a big pain, and I ended up trying to make a box for this and mount it there, and I just couldn't come up with anything that looked good. And I ended up like just cutting it up and doing all sorts of tests to try and make this work. It doesn't work. If you're building a cafe racer like this, don't even bother. Just skip over it. You'll save yourself a lot of headache and a lot of money and a lot of effort if you just don't bother with one of these batteries. Instead, what you want is one of these little AntiGravity batteries. This is their AntiGravity 12-cell lithium-ion battery, and this thing doesn't weigh hardly anything. I think it's like 2 or 3 pounds. And obviously it's super light. I can pick it up and throw it around. That's difficult to do with this one. That thing's super heavy, the lead battery. But this thing doesn't weigh anything. It's perfect. It's super tiny. You should be able to fit it just about anywhere. If you're gonna get one of these custom batteries for your XV750 or higher, like the XV1100 or something like that, make sure you get the 12-cell. You might be able to get away with like the 8-cell if you have the 500 or the 250 or something like that. But for the 750, you want the 12-cell. That being said, it becomes a little difficult to judge where you can mount this thing, right? So I see a lot of people that mount it like up under here, and I guess it would kind of fit, right, if you had that. But for me, it doesn't really fit because of I mounted the shock here, and it has the piston kind of in the way, and I didn't want to be hitting that. I could have mounted it further back, and that might have worked, but the nature of my seat is that there's just really not like a ton of space back here, so it would have to be hanging down a little bit anyway. So I didn't really want to do that. So ultimately the idea was to build a box that could fit this battery and mount underneath the bike up to where the center stand used to be. So that's what this is for. You know, we've designed it in such a way that it'll fit that 12-cell battery, and you can just kind of like clip it in place almost. Right? So the box just kind of clips in place, and those little arms hold it exactly where it's supposed to be. So that ends up being the full mounting for that box. And yeah, it's pretty low, you know, but it's not really all that much lower than the engine block. So hopefully not something we're going to need to worry about too much there. But it should be pretty stable once we bolt it in, obviously. And I think it'll work out real well in terms of keeping it in place. Now the trick is to note that obviously, you know, we built these little arms, and they're designed in such a way that they'll rest on top of the tabs. If you see these tabs here, right? And those were for the OEM center stand. And we're going to leverage those to keep our battery box in place. So that's what these little hooks are for. On the other end, we have these tabs that I welded onto the side real poorly. You'll notice my welding sucks because, I mean, in all honesty, welding this real thin gauge metal is tough, because I forget exactly what I used for this, but it was thin 22 gauge. Yeah, 22 gauge or 24 gauge steel, and I kept burning through it a lot. I'm not a very experienced welder. I'm a software guy by trade, so my welding sucks, but in this case, it's not like a super critical part, so I think we'll be okay. But yeah, so these two tabs, what these are for is the OEM battery box actually mounted the starter solenoid next to it. So, you know, the OEM battery box had a position for that. So I wanted to recreate that. And the trick with the Virago starter solenoid is if you go buy a spare, you're probably going to get this little boot, right? Here's the whole solenoid. This was my original one. This is you know, a brand new OEM solenoid, and it comes with this little boot. And what this boot allows you to do is it has these two mount points in it, these sleeves. And so we'll be able to basically, right, just sleeve this starter solenoid onto the side of the battery box like that. And it's a real tight fit, it's not going anywhere, and especially once we actually hook the wires up to it, it's definitely not going anywhere. So that'll end up being a nice way for us to mount the starter solenoid onto the battery box and keep it hidden and out of the way. So that, you know, we're not looking at a whole giant mess of wires up front, which I think is good. So then the final thing to note about this battery box is, yeah, okay, I made it out of real thin gauge steel, but because it's steel is conductive electrically, right? And we're going to put this battery in here, and that could lead to a short or some type of danger. So we wanted to, you know, protect it as much as possible. So on the inside of the box, you'll see that I've lined it with this vulcanized rubber. I basically have, I bought these sheets of 3M vulcanized rubber, and this is high heat temperature rubber, so I think it has like a 500-degree melting point, but it's also adhesive on the back, so it has a, you know, a sticky adhesive on the back, and then the, you know, the front is just rubber, so you'll peel off the plastic protector here and then just have rubber. So now it's, you know, safe to the touch, you know, as well as will be safe and insulate the box from the battery when you drop it in here. Additionally, on the bottom, you'll notice I have a much thicker piece of foam just on the bottom, so that when we slide the battery in there, at its base, it has a nice thick resting spot. And that foam actually comes with the anti-gravity battery. It'll be packed in the box, and you can just chop up some of this stuff and use that. So this ends up being the base. So when all is said and done, the battery just slides right in, right? And now we have a real nice snug position for the battery box. It's not going anywhere. It's held real tight. Really, the only things left is to find some way to latch it down. And I'm still debating on whether or not I'll use like a strap of some sort, which is probably what I'm gonna end up doing, or I might see if I can find a cover of some sort, like a neoprene or a polyurethane cover that I can slide over the top of this. You know, just to hold it in place and keep it protected from the elements, dirt and road grime and stuff like that. In terms of hooking up the rest of the battery, I went ahead and bought 2 brand new battery cables. Hopefully they'll fit. You want to get ones that have a good thick gauge to them. I want to say these were 4 AW4, AWG4. Maybe, I don't remember, it doesn't say. But these were big thick battery cables, so we'll end up using one for the positive and one for the negative. And then of course I grabbed these battery terminal covers as well, that we'll use just to once again help protect and isolate the terminals themselves, you know. So these will end up sitting kind of like this on top of the battery, you know, and then we'll find some cover of some sort to drop in there. And that should work pretty well. Yeah, okay, so the anti-gravity battery kit is going to give you the 2 screws you need. And I think for now it's going to be as simple as really just plugging this stuff in. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to connect the other ends of the wires. So this is obviously your ground, right? And this is obviously your power. The power wire is going to be easy because we're actually just going to wrap it around here, right? And hook it up into the starter solenoid, which is what we're doing here. So, you know, here's your battery, and the negative will just run off to the ground, but the battery positive cable here goes directly to the starter switch, which is this thing here, starter solenoid. So I'm not exactly sure which side is the proper side. I assume it must be this one as the hot side. Yeah, I'm not sure on that one just yet, but for now, you know, let's just go ahead and, you know, slide this on in there. And we'll kind of get these in place for the time being. Yeah, I guess for now, I'm not exactly certain on how this is going to go, but based on the wiring diagram, it seems to me that the primary battery cable, primary positive battery cable, is going to go into the side of the starter solenoid that has the blue wire, right? So, and on the starter solenoid is this side, and then this side will head off towards the starter itself. That's just an assumption. I'm having trouble judging it because there are no other markings on the starter solenoid itself that I can see. So we're going to take a shot at it. If it's wrong, we'll just flip it around. No big deal. But yeah, okay. Go ahead and you know, keep this little rubber boot in place to protect that thing. Those connections there. Go ahead and slide the starter solenoid into its position. And then just go ahead and drop this down. Alright, so this ends up kind of being where we're at. Don't tighten it down for now. We'll get it tightened down more appropriately here in a minute. Okay, so it's a real tight fit, but it'll make it. And it looks like we're not really going to have a whole lot of room for a cover of any sort. But that's fine. It's pretty well covered anyway by these, terminal covers that we got. They're pretty well crammed in there. I don't think we're going to end up in a situation where it's a really big deal. But I don't know. We may still want to find a way to cover it to, protect it from water. So we'll look for something for that going forward. Try and get a rubber neoprene cover or something like that to put over all this stuff. But either way, with the battery box in place, what happened is the red terminal cable, we squeeze in just behind it. It's hard to see, but just behind it so that it comes out on the back side of this. You might be able to see it a little bit better down here. So it comes up in the back side here, where we will mount it to the starter solenoid like so. And then we'll find a way to get the starter solenoid in place. We'll figure that out in a minute. We're probably just gonna have to bend the wiring harness a little bit. But the ground itself from the battery, we snaked up through the the secondary subframe here, pulled it out right here, and we're essentially going to mount it to one of these bolts so that it's more or less grounded directly to the frame. And I think that should be good enough. So in terms of getting the starter solenoid connected, we have these two wires here that are each responsible for something to do with the starter. I'll try and see if I can snake this one out of here. Well, let's go ahead and pull these two bolts out so we can get those cables out. And keep in mind that these are two separate size bolts. And go ahead and get this out of the way. Okay, so one of these wires, this is a grounding wire, I think, that gets plugged in directly to the harness, if I recall. The other, this is the primary power wire that goes directly to the starter solenoid. So we're going to go ahead and plug this up. Plug this up so that we're pretty much ready to go when we get ready to do the rest of the wiring. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and get the starter solenoid wires tightened down a little. And just so we have them in a good shape, we're going to want to make sure that the wires are turned in such a way so that when we fold this into here, now we have a good position for our starter solenoid, as well as good position for the wiring. That way we can tuck the wire more or less like that and keep it out of the path of everything else. Okay, and then if I recall, the rest of it is basically, we plug that into the wiring harness, and then we'll have the main fuse, which was this, that once again plugs directly into the wiring harness. Whoever owned this bike before me, this was the primary ground, I believe, and this was off to the main fuse. But I don't remember exactly how they had it. I assume it was just like this, and they had directly wired it off like that. So I assume that's how that worked, right? That main fuse just went directly off. But we're going to have a different main fuse that connects there, so we'll get around to that particular wiring bit in a future video, probably the next one. But for now, I feel like we've got pretty much everything we need. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to get bolts. We're going to use these things for the battery box to hold it in place. You know, since these were the OEM bolts. And in terms of screwing these down, we're just using the original bolt that was used for the center stand, and we're sliding another nut over it, but a larger one, so that we're more or less just using that nut as a spacer. And that will allow us to tighten this down appropriately. Make sure that battery box isn't going anywhere. And now that's a good stable battery box. Not going nowhere. Final piece to the puzzle, really, now that we've installed all this stuff. I want to try and make sure that battery, the main power wire, is tucked as good as it can be. You don't want it snagging on anything while we're riding around. And then, you know, go ahead and make sure that your starter wire is tucked pretty well too. Try to make sure that it's not contacting anything super hot, and that it's held in with the you know, these little brackets. Then we're good to go. We'll worry about the starter's grounding wire here in a later video, as well as plugging this into the wiring harness. We'll also worry about getting the you know, the wire for the main fuse here in a little while as well. Probably in the next video. But for now, we'll leave the grounding wire untouched. Although I guess I do want to make sure that it actually fits. Alright, primary ground. And that should be good. Okay, that being said, that was really one of the biggest hurdles we had been waiting on in terms of electrical. So we'll discuss exactly how we're going to finish getting this all plugged up together, you know, do the rest of the wiring, and things should start falling into place real quickly now. I'm pretty happy with the battery box, how that turned out. I like that you're not really going to be able to see it. It's pretty hidden. Not exactly easy to service if you have to, you know, say get to the battery for any reason. It's going to be easier to remove the grounding point here than it is to get the grounding point out off the top of the battery. Also, you know, I don't really like that the top of the battery is kind of exposed. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal, but it is a concern in case we had like water or something. So we might want to come up with a some type of cover if we can fit one down in there. I'm not sure yet, but come up with something. I'm also not like particularly enthused with how all this turned out. So we'll look at that here shortly. I did try and find a boot, and we might go and install this here in a bit, but I did try to find a boot that we could use for the starter solenoid. So we might be able to find a way to cover these things using this boot, and that way keep them a little more protected. And this boot came off like a 1980 something Suzuki Dual Sport, I want to say. I don't know exactly what model, but I just found it on eBay. has a rubber starter solenoid cover. So I think we might try to see if we can reuse this to help cover the connections for the starter solenoid. But we'll do that when we do the main fuse, because we're going to have to come back down here to rewire it. So all in all, I think I'm pretty happy with that. I like how the grounding point turned out. You know, I like how the battery box went in. I think it's good and stable. I don't think we're going to have any problems with it. You know, even it's pretty well protected from rocks and stuff like that. You know, for the most part anyway. So I think we'll be good. We'll be good. Yeah, we might still kind of revisit how this wiring works. Maybe we can find a way to tuck this a little better. You know, so I don't know, but for now, I think that'll do the trick. So, okay, I think that'll about do it for the battery box today. I'm really glad that we finally got that installed and everything looks like it's going to work out real well. It was probably the hardest part of building this bike. So if you're not like an engineer or you know, a good welder or something like that, you're probably going to want to, you know, find somebody else to make that for you. Even, you know, it gave me a pretty fair amount of trouble, and hitting myself in the face with the grinder, and, you know, almost losing an eye in the process. Like it's been an ordeal to get that piece. So I'm really excited to see it finally installed. I think it's going to work out well, and I think we're pretty well on our way to getting this bike on the road. So stay tuned. In the next few episodes, we're going to be starting the electrical stuff, and we're getting real close to the end. So we'll be there. Thanks.